Happy Friday, everyone. This is Mark again with Cardivox Academy, and today we're getting a little bit more melodic, like we talked about in the last video, where we talked about Shadow to Prevail and low, brutal gutturals. Today, we're still doing some screaming, but we're bringing in some singing, because singing is fun, and I like it. So there were a lot of suggestions for a lot of different great bands. I decided to go with Obliviscaris. Reason is, it's kind of interesting because they have two vocalists. They've got, I'm not totally sure how to pronounce his name. He calls himself Zen in a lot of interviews, but he does like the growling. Yeah, he's this guy that you see right now, kind of in that light. And then you've got Tim, Charles, their clean singer and violinist. And I just think that that's really an interesting dynamic. And so, you know, I decided to play with that. So the song's called Intravenous. We're going to get into that. A few very brief announcements. I'm not going to take up too much time at the beginning. I've had a surprising amount of people ask me actually how they can support the channel. And first and foremost, thank you for that. That you would even think of that. That's makes me feel good. I had some people, as I knocked the cord out of my headphones here, I had some people ask about a Patreon. I don't know about that. Maybe. I don't know. But for now, I have shirts. Yay! Cardivox Academy shirts. In fact, I'll show you. They're just on the Kardashev, like my band's e-store. I'll put a link down in the bottom. But, you know, right now, just kind of some simple stuff. Whoops, that's too close. Some simple stuff with the Cardivox Academy logo in color, black and white. And then this one's kind of funny. My buddy Riley, I'll link his Instagram below. He drew me as what he calls a meatball, just like this face. I like to think that it looks like a well-rounded Obi-Wan Kenobi. But anyway, that's enough of that. I just thought it was cool. So for people who do like the channel, that want to help it out, you know, buy a shirt. But you certainly don't have to. You know, I just appreciate you coming out, hanging out, and talking music with me. So we're going to go ahead and get into this song. I'm going to drink my tea here because it's finally cooling down in Arizona. It's a very brisk 73 Fahrenheit, or 75 Fahrenheit, which I think would be 22, 23 Celsius. I don't know. But we're getting chilly over here in the desert, so we need our warm beverages. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into it. As always, I'm going to try to make this as valuable as possible. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's pull it back to the beginning here. Oh, what is this mess? There we go. All right, here we go. That shot looks so cool. The bass in this band is phenomenal. Love the dramatic look of it. Oh, that bass. Oh, man. I love that. I love the violin. So let's talk about those vocals there. Now, you know, sometimes false chord and fry can sound kind of similar, especially when in a mix. And I wouldn't be surprised if those lows are more on the Fry side of things than the false chord side of things. Now, being more of a false chord guy myself, I would approach it from a false chord perspective. But if you're out there and you like to fry and fry is what you do, so be it. You know, I got nothing against fry. I'm just more false chord myself. But one thing that I really love about this guy is that he has a very open and resonant tone, which you get from Fry pretty easily. False chord, you kind of have to work it a little bit more because a lot of times people push out a lot more air than they need. We've talked about that before. One way that he resonates very well, and this is typical of classically trained singers, so interesting. I wonder if he's got some singing training himself, but you can hear that his soft palate is raised pretty high. That's basically like, imagine like a room with a flat ceiling and then a room with a domed ceiling. If you're in the room with the domed ceiling and you talk more, the sound of your voice is going to echo and resonate. So when he's doing these, let's go back and listen to him just a little bit. Again, I want us to be able to listen to the song, but it's worth talking about. Where does it start? Because he starts on a really nice tone. Ghosts of Porcelain Waste. We'll just let it ride. Here it comes. Yeah, so you can hear him keeping that soft palate raised, and then he's kind of articulating with the front while keeping it nice and cavernous back here. One thing that I am appreciating about his style here is, it's very easy as a vocalist. Even I fall into this trap. I was re-recording vocals for Kardashev yesterday just because I wanted to do them different. It's very easy to just find that tempo and go, ghosts of porcelain waste, the innocence of faith. But he kind of skips around with it, like when he says the innocence in faith. You know, as a vocalist, we do more than just make the sound, right? We do more than just do the voice, do the roar. You know, we do what the music needs in the moment. So like sometimes if we have a really complex section where the bass and the drums are going, or the guitar and the drums and the bass are all going crazy, maybe we do something a little bit slower and predictable so the listener has something to anchor to. This is kind of the opposite. Things are more driving and rhythmic in the back, so he kind of skips the innocence and faith, makes it a little bit more, I don't want to say bouncy, but it pulls you in. We're going to listen to it again, and then we're going to move on. We'll move away from this section and get farther through this. Okay, I want to talk about the way he said writhing. The last sentence, is writhing across the neverwhere, and then he says neverwhere again in a high. And the more I listen, the more I'm thinking this is some Fry stuff, although a lot of times vocalists will switch between the two. So what you're going to hear when he says writhing is he's got that high, soft palate, right? The high, like, sort of writhing, and then he narrows it with the front of his mouth for the ing to really bring out the sound of ing. That's something interesting too with metal vocals. Like generally when we're singing, we don't want to have like a sharp E sound just because it's not that fun to listen to. So instead of saying like writhing, most people would say writhing. So it's more like writhing, you know? But with metal vocals, sometimes it sounds good to narrow it and make it thin. And so he holds the back of his mouth open, soft palate up, then he kind of pinches the E shut by raising his tongue and narrowing the airway. So that's pretty cool. Now, see, somebody in the last video, and this is very true, and I try to be transparent about it, but it's worth bringing up, talked about how lots of music videos are lip syncing, which is true. It doesn't mean the vocalist is cheating. It just means they want to put the sound of the album on top of the video. But sometimes what they do in music videos is proper, right? So he's moving high. Let's point at the actual thing here. He's moving higher, right? So he's moving into, usually the way that you do that is by getting sort of nasal in your register. Not always, but he's also opening his mouth nice and wide to kind of brighten the sound. And that's something I'm always going to drive home. You know, before you, one of the best ways to get volume is with the front of your mouth. That's a perfect example. We're going to listen to this whole thing and then talk about it, but he doesn't say haunting reflections. He says haunting reflections, and it sounds more powerful. I love this guy's singing, by the way. So let's hear it all the way through, and then we'll talk about it. Haunting reflections of the mirrored void. Is this the end of everything we love? The wounds of life, weaving the loom, dwellers in the deep, world entombed. Okay, so one thing that part of the reason I picked Obliviscaris is because there's a good contrast, right? A lot of times in metal, usually, maybe not usually, but a lot of times in metal, your screamer is also your singer. That's how it is in Kardashev. I do the singing and the screaming. And a lot of times the singer will do like distorted singing. Hey, yeah, haunting reflections. Just a personal preference. I like it when the screaming is gritty and the singing is crystal clear, like snow, like pure snow melting on a diamond, crystal clean. I don't know where I came up with that imagery. That didn't make sense, but you know what I mean. And I think that's really cool here. So part of the way that he does this is when we want to sing powerfully like this, there are a couple things that are going to help us. One of the main things is going to be utilizing the hard palate, frontal resonance. A lot of people, will refer to this or similar things as singing into the mask being this part of your face. Although I've heard some people refer to the mask as like the forehead and the eyes. Really, front of the mouth resonance is kind of how I think of it. And kind of to describe it, he says, well, let me remember the melody here. Everything we love, the wounds of life, the wounds of life. Is this the end of everything? Sorry, I only listened to the song once before, so this is a little bit of a pretty genuine reaction. I've only heard it once. We love the wounds of life. So when we sing, we can sing kind of everything we love, right? In the back, that's going to give us kind of closer to like an operatic, classical, is this the end of everything we love? The wounds of life. If we push it forward, it's going to have kind of a brighter, pingier sound. And you can do that. There are a couple exercises I work with my students on to teach them how to move the resonance back and forward by choice on command. One way you can do it is you can kind of just make like a I'm making like a halfway between an E and an I, and I basically, using my diaphragm, give some support to that sound and move it forward. Haunting reflections of the mirrored void. Is this the end of everything we love? I also like that styling he does. He doesn't just say, of everything we love. He hangs on that L. Of everything we love. The wounds of life. Of life. I think that sounds pretty cool. But yes, forward resonance, raised soft palate. With his singing, it doesn't sound like his soft palate is like mondo high up there. That's where you really get the la, that sound, bramato jetto. That's where you get that. So it's raised, but not quite as dramatic.
Leaving the home, dwellers in the deep world into
Another thing, and then I'll let it keep going. Another thing is that ooh is a great vowel to practice these more projected tones, belting even. Ooh, because it's just very inherently buzzy because your lips are forward, you're lengthening the oral cavity. So different vowels, just from my experience in teaching people these sorts of things, different vowels tend to be different. Some vowels are easier for other people. For me, it's an other people, it might be ooh. So, something to think about. I love this song. He's doing a really good job. Zen is doing a really good job cooperating with the instruments here. He comes in, he steps out. He comes in, he steps out. Kind of with the rhythm section, and also letting the guitar stand forward a little bit. He almost goes, it's not a pig squeal, but he almost kind of, like, he tightens up when he says bequeath. Bequeathed. Bequeathed. He, like, tightens it up almost to the point of it being a pig squeal. It's not a pig squeal, but it's interesting.
dwellers in the deep world into
You can kind of see it there. Yeah. Now here's an interesting thing. So sometimes getting up to the higher vocals can be difficult for people. I've mentioned this before. Highs are my comfort zone. Lows are where I have to kind of warm up and get into the mindset of it. He says intravenous, and he says, yeah, intravenous quickens, right? So yeah is a really nice way to articulate our high vocals, to lean into them, because it's narrow. You can make it nasal pretty easy, and it's not as much of a glottal granted, if you're approaching this from a false chord perspective, you shouldn't, your vocal folds shouldn't be going anyway. But interesting and worth pointing out. Intravenous versus intravenous. Subtle, but it can be easier for people who have trouble with highs to start with Ys. Wow, that rhymed. Regular Dr. Seuss over here. So that was an awesome section. The back and forth with the rhythm section. Not like, one of my least favorite things is when a vocalist just screams over the whole song for the sake of screaming over the whole song. He is clearly not doing that. he really bounces back and forth, and that makes sense because kind of the nature of their dynamic is there are two of them, so he's kind of used to trading off, right? I want to talk about his Tim's singing here real quick, so let's go ahead and listen to it. Okay, so he starts with a pretty solid Leinster, right? One thing that is you need to be careful with, and he does a really great job. I'm just pointing this out for your own knowledge. There's this thing, I've heard a couple words associated with it. Yarling, I think, is one. I'm not too sure, so if I'm using that, feel free to correct. If I'm using that wrong, feel free to correct me. But with our R's, people really sometimes get over dramatic with them. This is a stylistic thing. You're not going to hurt yourself, but like earth, it's really easy to accidentally say hearth, and then you sound kind of like, you know, and if you like that, by all means, do it, love it, sell your music, tour the world. But just keep in mind when you're playing with those more like rhotic vowels, that means there's like an R sound attached to it. Just be careful, maintain control over them, because it's easy for them to slip out of your control, and then you're up there like, hey everybody, you're my girlfriend. That sentence didn't make any sense, but whatever. Let's listen some more. Sorry, it's been a goofy day today, and I'm bringing it into the video. I apologize. Cheers, everybody.
Shadows all entwining their distant sights, weaving the room, dwellers in the deep drift below.
So really cool melody writing on Tim's part here. I don't know if he writes his own melodies. A lot of times the rest of the band writes it, but I think he wrote it. He starts off different, and then he slides into the same melody that he used earlier. Really cool, and I love the delicate delivery of intravenous. I can't remember the notes exactly. Let's hear it. Yeah, so one thing, so let's talk a little bit about that, because a lot of times, especially like rock and metal singers, they spend they belt nonstop. And like, listen, if you know how to belt right, get it, like do it. But one thing I would suggest is learn how to be gentle, so that if you need to, you can. It's a really cool technique. And so what you're going to do is you're going to lay off a little bit of the power from the diaphragm, right? And in this case, you can allow your voice to get a little breathy. A lot of times in tutorials and YouTube channels, you'll hear people talk about breathy singing like it's bad or something. It's not. It's just a little harder to control, and for beginners, sometimes they can get too breathy. And then instead of intravenous, it's intravenous, right? So just maintain control. And one way you can practice your vocal fold closure, there are a lot of exercises I do and work with. It's kind of an area that can be tricky for some people, is just practice singing from a clean note to a whisper, and then learn how it feels to move through those different gradients of control, you know. Also notice he still had the pinginess, the brightness without belting. Sometimes people think to get the bright forward resonance, you have to sing loud, hey, hey, yeah. But you don't. You can, hey, hey. It's gentler, but it's still bright, right? It's still kind of pingy. So pay attention to that. Also, Can I ask videographers out there a question? What's with the girls taking baths in milk? I don't get it. I love this video. I think the production's amazing. I love the lights, but I'll never, like, maybe if I had it explained to me, I would get it. Maybe it's just for contrast, black hair, milk water, but I'm always just like, I could have had so much cereal. You're wasting my cereal milk. Anyways, let's go.
The distant sights, weaving the room, dwellers in the deep, drift below.
I love how the smoke is like a pyramid. I'm sorry, folks. We got to hear that again. The violin trade-off to the guitar was masterful. Also, I wish I knew more about violin playing, because the technique where it gets kind of squeaky and kind of like the violin gets kind of squeaky and raspy, but it's controlled. He's doing it on purpose. I love that. So if anybody who watches this video plays violin or knows about violin, toss it in the comments. Let me know. I'd be interested to learn if that technique has a name or anything like that. But we have to hear this pass off again. Not to mention, he kind of plays violin the way he sings, sliding into and sliding out of the phrasing. Like if we listen to him when he sings the word loom, you can kind of hear him lean in and then lean out of it. Let's go back and then hear the violin.
Distant sights, weaving the room, dwellers in the deep, drift below.
Shred. Sorry, folks, we're just going to let this section ride. It's too good. We're just going to let it ride. Let's all just enjoy it together. An interesting to the ferryman's drains. I think that's what he did. Drains. It's just an interesting way to resolve it. Let's hear it again. And again, breathy singing. It's it's a little bit airy, a little bit delicate. Totally fine. If you want some other examples, maybe outside of metal, of bands who have really good sort of breathy type of singing, Novo Amor was one of my favorites. Song Seneca, specifically. And then my buddy, Patterson, has a project called Hollow Oceans. I'll link all these below. And then, of course, The Mighty Holy Fawn. So good. But listen to how he comes in here. It's so gentle. And then he brightens up for Ferryman. Right? He leans into it. He brightens up for Ferryman, which makes sense because that's kind of like the exotic word in the sentence. So he gives it a little bit more oomph. one thing that's interesting here, fascinating. With his screaming, you could almost hear a little bit of voice in it, but that leans me even more so to think he's rocking that fry, because sometimes with a fry, you'll hear what sounds like a vocal tone, but it's really more of like an overtone. It's basically just certain harmonics bouncing around and coming out. So it's not the same as going, but you can hear a little bit of that here, and it sounds pretty cool. Maybe it's always there, but because there's a little less going on, it's cutting through the mix a little bit more. Could be. I love that laser smoke flat effect. You can hear it really well on Tainted.
In the end of all we live, endless in tainted flesh, and down eruption.
Corruption, not eruption. That's really cool. It's interesting. This is a really good example of what I was talking about before. You know, if we're going to be a vocalist in a band, we need to do more than just know how to make the sounds. We need to know how to cooperate musically with the rest of the instruments. And, you know, we've got, you know, the drums are driving. There's a lot going on in the background. Now he's doing something a little bit more predictable pattern. But that's not bad that it's kind of predictable. It's anchoring the listener. Now, this is, of course, just my preference in the way that I listen to and do, you know, write vocal patterns myself. Nico helps me a lot. But I think it's intentional, and I think he's doing such a good job, especially since we're coming up to the end of the song. You know, these vocals, like, they're our craft. You know, they're our craft. There's something that it's so much cooler than just the sounds we make. Well, I got it wrong, but you see what I mean. Now, that's something I also want to talk about there. This is such a good example of breath management because he's really jumping in, and I'm very confident in that he's doing that all on one breath, you know, so he's taking his breath.
Cradle to rest a moment between.
Right. He's not having to like between, and then he ends on that high that he holds for a long time. Good breath management. That's what that is.
Haunting reflections of the mirrored void. Is this the end of everything we love? The wounds of life. We heal the strength to rise, dwellers in the deep. Dream a world only home.
I totally thought he was gonna go higher, guys. I totally thought he was gonna go higher.
Dream a world only home.
It's good that he went low to kind of mellow out with the music, but I thought he was gonna crank it. Cool song. Like I said, I had heard this. Alcest Sapphire. That's one of my favorite bands of all time. But you know, maybe for another video. Anyways, so that was Intravenous by Neverbreath. Great band. I love the instrumentation. I love the melody. Again, if you're wanting to sing more like that, less with the grit and distortion that you hear in other metal bands, which is totally great. It's just, you know, it's not for everybody. Just remember, get your breath support under control and don't push from your neck so it's not right, it's all down here, all down here. Relaxed up here. Make that hard palate and that nose buzz. Hey! Ooh, let's try that again. Hey! There we go. All right. Well, that's it for today. Again, I do one-on-one lessons via Skype if you're interested. Always trying to put some things together to show availability. Actually, I've got some things in the work right now, not only for an interactive calendar where you can see my availability, but also to make like e-courses that you can purchase and download and watch on your own time. So more to come on that. But thanks for checking it out. Thanks for hanging out. Many thanks. Much love. Goodbye.